Okay. Brief pause. Okay. Do we need to redo the intro? No, perfect. Okay. I have one announcement to make, and then we can do introductions. The bathrooms are not working. So I don't know what that solution is, but I was asked to make that announcement. So don't shoot the messenger. But yeah, we should probably go around the room and do some introductions. I think I've already introduced myself, so we can start here and go that way.
Hi, I'm Carrie Flaherty-Wallia, a restoration ecologist for the Tampa Estuary program.
Hi, Rebecca Delp, Senior Project Manager with Cummins Cedarburg.
Hi, Natasha DeCraw, Pinellas County Environmental Management.
Blake Simmons, Environmental Social Scientist for the Tampa Bay Estuary program.
Casey Craig, Assistant Research Scientist with FWC and the Coastal Wetlands Research Program.
Hi, I'm a Dantis with Applied Ecology.
Kira Barrera, City of St. Pete.
Steve Myers, USF College of Marine Science.
Maya Burke, Tampa Bay Estuary Program.
That mic seems to not be working.
The folks online, let us know if you could hear Marcus when he spoke.
Yep.
No.
No.
No, we did not.
Testing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hear you now.
Yeah, we hear it now.
Sounds good, not just like it's from other speakers, like it's actually the mic at the podium.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, for speakers, project. Okay.
Okay, I can just hang out here. All righty. So hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm here to talk to you today about the Tire Reef feasibility study that Cummins Cedarburg did for TBEP. And so just getting in, we can figure out how to advance slides. Yeah. Okay. Getting into a little bit of background on this project. This is a artificial tire reef that is located just south of Pinellas Point, as shown in the red box here on the screen. And it was discovered through some surveying efforts that were earlier and separate from our current efforts. And so TBEP wanted to investigate the tire reef a little bit more to see what the existing conditions were, so they could decide what maybe some long-term solutions would be for that tire reef. And so we did a little bit of background digging for, when this tire reef was deployed. There were a lot of tire reefs deployed throughout coastal waters of Florida between the 60s and 80s. This one specifically was installed by the city of St. Pete in 1966. And so we have some very crude permit drawings that give us some details on the reef at the time of deployment. And so we know that they aimed for an area of about 1,000 feet by 150 feet wide and deployed approximately 4,400 tire units. And by tire units, I mean these groups of 3 that they put together and kind of concreted so that these 3 tires would go out as one unit. And so you're looking at about 13,000 tires total when you're counting individual tires, but about 4,400 units that were deployed. And so the permits did call for no stacking of units. And so these were meant to just kind of be dispersed throughout that artificial reef area. And then they also were authorized to deploy some larger clay pipes out there. So the overall goal of this artificial reef at the time of deployment was to enhance habitat fisheries or habitat for fisheries in this area. So we obviously know that tire reefs for artificial reef or tires for artificial reef materials are no longer authorized. We have since discovered that there are some environmental concerns recognized for this material, including physical hazard for when these tires potentially get dislodged and move throughout the bay or ocean, wherever they may be. And then also the concerns of leaching of toxins and microplastics into the water column as these tires degrade. And so here's some images on the right of the tire reef and some of the more degraded tires that we saw while we were out in the field. And so to address some of these concerns, obviously remediation is required. And so Cummins Cedarburg was brought on by TBP to do just that, kind of see what the options are. And so we wanted to get updated bathymetric surveying for specific to the tire reef site. We wanted to do in-water reconnaissance surveying to see, you know, what habitat the tires are providing, what's growing on them, what that looks like. And then we wanted to get some initial conversations with the permitting agencies to see how they may regulate the various options that may be presented moving forward. And so all of this went into a restoration plan that outlined frameworks for the various options. So removal, enhancement, and a no action alternative, which we will get into in just a little bit. And so the bathymetric survey, you can see that here on the screen, revealed water depths between about 11 and 15 feet. It was interesting. There was sort of this ridge that you can see. The outline in blue is the approximate tire reef area and associated tire field, scatter field. And so we're calling kind of that main oblong, larger polygon, the main tire field, and then the small areas around it, the scatter field. And so you can see on the eastern, north is up here on the eastern side of that reef, the water depths go a little bit shallower, and that continues beyond just the tire reef site. And so once we zoomed out a little bit, we did discover that that went well beyond the tire reef site and in interesting directions. So don't have a great answer for what exactly that is, but have determined that the ridge there that we're seeing at the tire reef location is not necessarily due to the tire reef placement there. It seems to be a more natural feature that extends well beyond the reef boundaries. So with this initial bathymetric survey data, we went in and identified areas that would potentially have tires. Obviously, the larger kind of tire reef main field area was pretty easy to identify, but we also noticed that there were a lot of areas of higher relief to the west, specifically of the main field. So we wanted to outline those so when we were doing our in-field reconnaissance, we could verify whether they were tires or not. And then we also had some data from 2018 from some of those earlier surveying efforts that I had mentioned earlier. And so we took that data and compared it to our more recent bathymetric data. And so that 2018 data is shown in red here. And then you have our initial analysis of the recent bathy data shown in blue. And so obviously, at face value, we were seeing that there seems to have been a shift to the west for kind of the main tire field area, as well as some additional scattering to the west, seemingly from dislodged tires and tires that are moving about there. And so we were at this time when this graph was made, we did not have the raw data from the 2018 data. We have since been able to take a little bit of a closer look at that, and there is a little bit more dispersal, it seems, to the west than what was identified here in this data, but not quite to the order of magnitude that we're seeing with the with the blue data here. And so there still seems to be a larger dispersal of tires in this more recent data set. And so once we had the tire reef boundaries identified, our next objective was to get in the field and see, one, if those extents of the tire reef were accurate, adjust them as needed, and two, identify what was being provided by the tires that were down there. And so we established this overall survey area into a 50-foot grid system and selected representative cells that we wanted to survey. And so we had a limited grant budget, so only had about 2 days for surveying here. And so we really had to be strategic, knowing that we likely would not be able to get in-depth surveying and quantitative surveying for the entire tire reef and associated scatter field. And so what we identified pre-field was that we would get a representative sample of the main field tire or the main tire field, which are shown by the red dots here, and then would have a priority secondary set of representative cells for the scatter field, which are shown in the orange. And then if any time allowed, we would move on to the secondary red or yellow dots that are shown here. And so this is ultimately what we ended up being able to survey in the field. We adjusted our methodology a bit while we were in the field. And so we ended up doing radial swims at each of these dots to the 50-foot grid extents. And so we went down, and for the primary tire field, we did 2 radial swims, one at 25 feet and one at 50 feet, kind of making general qualitative observations of what was down there, about how many tires were down there. And then in the scatter fields, we were able to do just 1 radial swim, but due to the lesser extent of tires and resources down there, we're able to kind of S-swim and cover all of that grid cell area with 1 swim there and get full tire counts in those. And then we also, part of the in-water work was to be able to put together a tire estimate of how many tires were still down there. And so we ended up adding in some belt transect surveys that allowed us to put transects along at least the main tire field reef, along representative areas, and then actually count the tires within that transect. So then we could then extrapolate that for tire estimates. And so you can see that data shown here. It was the intent to do 1 more transect survey up at the north end of the site, but we ended up getting stormed out on our last day of surveying and weren't able to get that. So we have the 3 transect surveys here that we were able to then extrapolate. Again, for the scatter field cells, we were able to do total counts of the tires that we were seeing in those cells. And then you'll see here, we had planned to do some angler use observations out on the tire reef during the 2 days that we were out there, given it was, a Tuesday and a Wednesday, I think it was, in the middle of the week. We really didn't see any anglers utilizing the reef, but I know TBP is putting together a more formal angler survey to hope to get some feedback from them and potential use on this reef. But that is something that they're interested in looking at as well. And so what's out on the tires? We have the growth varies depending on the tire density, but you have the areas where there are denser tires, you have a little bit more growth, primarily sponges and octocorals. You also have a lot of your smaller organisms like mussels and barnacles, turf algae, things like that. You do have the occasional hard coral. They're very rare, but they did appear to be growing kind of directly on top of the tires. We only had, I think it was like 8 to 10 in the entire main field area that we observed. So again, these are relatively small and pretty infrequent throughout the main area. Your primary growth there is going to be the sponges and the octocorals. Visibility is really limited here, as you can see by some of the photos. These are some of our better photos. And then again, the density of growth really correlated with the density of tires. And so the bottom right photo is more represents more of what was in the main tire field, especially in kind of like the middle, more dense areas. And then the upper left photo represents maybe a unit of tires that was out in the scatter field with a lot less growth there. We did do some modified RVC surveys as well and counted the fish and variety of fish species that were there. And so it was obvious in the more dense areas that there were larger fish groupings hanging out around that area. They definitely diminished as we got to the scatter field, but wanted to make sure we were noting what fish species were using the tire field specifically. And so here is a cumulative list of not only the encrusting organisms, also the corals that were observed, and then the various fish species. For our tire conditions and estimates, again, we were able to extrapolate that transect data along that main tire reef to determine how many tires, again, estimated were in that main field area. And then for the scatter field, for the cells that we did survey, we were able to take total counts. And then so we were able to extrapolate that across the entire scatter field area using the previously identified pre-field bathymetric polygons that were pulled from the bathymetric data there. So we estimated that there's about 7,600 tires in the main field area, about 450 tires in the scatter field for a total about 8,100 tires throughout the reef area. Now you'll note that these are individual tires, not tire units. And so if you recall, the original deployment was for about 13,000 tires. So we have about 8,000 here. Again, these are very rough estimates based on a limited representative subset of data, but we can kind of assume that these tires, one, are not only moving, but two, are actually leaving the site completely. As far as tire condition, as I mentioned earlier, and you saw some previous photos, these are clearly starting to degrade or have been degrading over the last handful of years. We are observing tires in units of 1 and 2, and so those original units of 3 are obviously becoming broken apart, and those tires moving apart separately, which further just strengthens the assumption that these tires are moving around. And then you have some tires that have almost disintegrated completely, which you can see in that bottom right photo. So we adjusted our tire reef at the main field boundary based on this field data. We were able to adjust it from that transect data and what we were able to observe within the radial swims in the cell. Unfortunately for the scatter field, there wasn't a ton of adjustment there. These polygons, some of them had some tires throughout, some of them, did not have any, but it was very hard to discern exactly which ones had tires and which ones didn't across the whole scatter field. So as we were putting together our restoration plan after going to the field, we also were looking at some other things to incorporate into our sort of recommendations. And so we were obviously looking at other reference projects, Osborne Reef in Broward County being the big one. There's a lot of data on that one. It's been going on for decades, and there's a lot of reporting documents available for that. There were some efforts in Palm Beach that we looked at, and then Pinellas County is currently is out to bid for removal of some tire reefs out on the Gulf side of Pinellas County. And so we were looking preliminarily at some of the documents they had put together and estimates there. Also looking at lessons learned and kind of how the methodology works for removal, specifically at the Osborne Reef, and different just methods and how effective and efficient they were at removing tires throughout the timeline there. We had our pre-apps with the agencies to have those initial conversations about, what some of the options are, whether it's removal or enhancement stabilization of the reef. And so we could get some of their regulatory input on how they would potentially permit the project. So we were prepared for that moving forward. And then we also did some limited coastal analysis looking at storm history, waves and winds, limited water quality data. And then with all of this information, we're looking at what potential priorities would be and then trying to put together some cost estimates for these various options. I will note that from the desktop, limited coastal analysis, they were able to identify that the prevailing wind and wave direction was from the northeast. So that kind of aligns with the west shift of the tire reefs there. But again, all of this data was just desktop analysis. So nothing is absolute with that data. So getting into the restoration plan, we came up with, or there's pretty much three options. So there is the obvious removal. This essentially is if the priority here for the project is to restore the site to pre-deployment conditions, which is basically just a kind of barren sand habitat. There's not much for structure or substrate otherwise out there beyond the reef. So if we wanted to get the site back to its historical conditions, removal would be that solution. It does eliminate or mostly eliminate concern for future, environmental hazards, including the physical dispersal as well as the contaminant leaching. And so it does fully address that for the most part, right? We hope that we'd be able to get all of the tires out, but the more efficient means and methods of that is focusing on the more dense areas. But ideally, this would alleviate the concerns there that we currently have for the tire reef. Option two is the enhancement option, and we looked at this with kind of a 2A and 2B, 2A being the perimeter stabilization approach. And so this would focus on putting stabilization materials, whether it be riprap or, those larger Goliath reef balls, some sort of prefab modules along the sides of the tire reef, focusing on the dense areas to kind of contain the existing tires that are there. And so this lets you maintain the, ecological function that the tires are already providing, but then could also provide some additional ecological habitat by introducing more natural materials at the site. And so obviously this doesn't completely eliminate the concern for leaching of the tires that are there. Again, we would be focusing on those dense areas as for the perimeter approach, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee that every single tire is going to stay in that perimeter as well, depending on just the conditions that are moving them. With this option, you could also look at better securing the tires that are there so they do stay together in those units of three and stay, weighted down and are harder to dislodge. So this image here, it identifies the denser areas of the main field area. And so the green outlines kind of on either side there represent where, the initial recommendation for where we would put those prefab modules or riprap stabilization materials that would stabilize that tire reef with the perimeter approach. The other option would be encapsulation. And so this is what we're referring to as the surface coverage approach. And so that's basically just burying or capping the existing high density areas with materials such as riprap or concrete materials of opportunity. And so this does temporarily eliminate the ecological function that the tires are providing, but would hopefully, through the introduction of these a little bit more natural materials, provide ecological habitat and services in the future with the known fact that the tire reef obviously was able to have recruitment and colonization of this habitat. And so those materials would likely have the same and bring those fish communities back into the area. And so those, again, large, dense areas are shown by the hashing here. And that idea would look something like this. And so you have your tires, again, they're kind of dispersed throughout that main field area, not stacked. And so the idea would be that you put, a geotextile down, a bedding stone to get that, as smooth as you can, and then putting some sort of armoring rock. Obviously, these areas are very large, and these are kind of like the full extent of the more dense areas of the reef. And so to be able, it can become cost prohibitive. And so to be able to make this a more feasible option, you have the option to reduce these areas even further, to maybe focus on even the more dense areas within those identified areas shown here, or phasing it so you can incorporate the plan as budget becomes available. This is also showing all riprap here for, conceptual idea, but you could also incorporate concrete materials of opportunity, which may alleviate some costs depending on where those materials are coming from. Both of these options could also be like you could do removing in addition to these two options, especially in some of those scatter field areas, to also remove some of those scatter field tires that won't necessarily reap the benefits of the perimeter encapsulation approaches. And then option 3 is basically a no action approach. And so this is really only an interim solution. It works better if you don't necessarily have the budget to move forward with some of the other options. They can be very expensive, which we'll get into in a moment. But basically just to continue monitoring the reef and seeing where these tires are moving, if they're moving, what type of growth continues to colonize on the tires and what those tires are bringing in. And so this strategy can really be scaled depending on one, budget availability, but two, what, research interests you may have, but would be a regular monitoring program to be able to just gather a little bit more information than, our kind of 1 year in-depth survey that we've done. So this just is a table that compares all of the options. It gives some advantages and disadvantages of all of the options. And then these are our cost estimates that we've put together. So option 1, removal, is obviously very expensive. You have just the marine contractors out there with very technical equipment and operational logistics for removal of the tires, a dive team down there. And so there's just a lot that goes into removal of these tires, disposal of these tires. But again, this does aim to eliminate the risks and the concerns that we have out there for the tire reef. So if that is the main objective, this is the route that would be preferred. Option 2 has a very wide-ranging cost, and that's because, it really depends on, one, how big the sites are that you are stabilizing or encapsulating, and then obviously depending on what type of materials you use. So something like the perimeter approach, where you're using larger artificial reef balls or some kind of prefab materials to perimeter stabilize the structure, may be on the lower end of that range. Something like the encapsulation, especially of that larger area that I shown, kind of like the maximum area you would encapsulate, is going to be on the higher end of that range. And so again, this option stabilizes the reef, but does not necessarily remove the leaching concerns, but does just kind of contain the reef is there, but it does do a better job at maintaining ecological function or providing ecological function that could, provide ecotourism activities such as snorkeling, scuba diving, fishing, things like that. And then option 3 is obviously your lowest cost option, but is not a permanent solution. And so you're going to, have to weigh the pros and cons of doing that. Eventually, you'll likely want to do one of the options 1 and 2. So it's kind of just buying you time, but lets you gather more information to maybe make a more informed decision on whether option 1 or 2 or some combination of them is ideal, and is essentially just a no action option here. And so really what TBP and, the group needs to do to decide which route to go forward with is just to weigh what their risks they are willing to accept for these environmental concerns, for the movement of the tires, the leaching. Obviously, funding resources are going to come into play, but really just deciding what the main objective of the project will be. So that's all I have. Happy to answer any questions if we have time.
So I'm wondering, did you find any kind of suitability or selection, like priority or metrics with the 1966 decision to use this area, or did you come across anything like, is this a priority good spot? Because like based on some of the stuff that you presented, there's obviously like a blowout, mid area or whatever. Like, is there any information as far as this is a good spot to have an artificial reef or less?
Yeah, not from the historical data. The 1960s documents are very just vague and sparse. And so it was really just the final permit documents. There wasn't any type of feasibility study that at least we found. Whether that was done or not, I'm not sure. From just being out there and noting the kind of surrounding conditions, it seems like it would be ideal. It has adequate water depths to not interfere with navigation at all. There's no immediately surrounding seagrass beds. There are, pretty far away, but nothing in the immediate surroundings. So I would say as far as location for an artificial reef, it's an ideal location. But I think more research potentially or more data gathered on kind of what's actually utilizing that reef more than just like a 2-day survey may be helpful to help aid that decision as well.
You mentioned
Mm-hmm.
scale of that, but
Yeah.
do you have any discussion on that?
We did, and that's something that the Army Corps would look at if we were to do the option 2, more of the enhancement option. It's not in the path of any like formal navigational channels. It's pretty far away from them. So we would want to take a closer look at, the typical routes of larger vessels coming under the bridge and where they're going. But the water depths, even with that ridge and the encapsulation, the water depths are about 10, 11 feet. And the encapsulation, because the tires are not stacked, they're all mostly half buried, actually. You're only going about 3 feet up. So you would still have about 8 foot of clearance. And again, we would look at that a little bit closer before we finalized any final heights. But as far as it just being in the route of navigation, it seems like it's pretty far away from any typical routes, especially for the larger vessels where it would be a concern. Yeah, and so with if it were to become more of a formal artificial reef or be stabilized with anything, we would put signage out there to make it known to boaters.
To identify what so we don't have while we're here today, with this centimeters for perfect segue, Brandon.
Are there any other questions?
What's the expected lifetime of the encapsulation? Are we talking decades or centuries?
Yeah, so typically that is a something that would have to be considered, right? Like the fact that these are structural components and they would likely involve some level of maintenance. Typically, those structures are good for decades, 30, 40 years. We really need to track them after large storm events. Anything that would go into the water ideally would have some sort of coastal analysis and structural analysis to make sure that it can withstand most storms, right? But sometimes depending on storm size or conditions, you just have to go out and maintain those by either making sure that those structures have not moved, big structures, if they have that sort of thing. So it will involve some level of maintenance, but the idea is that it would last, for 40, 50 years without damage or
So jurisdictionally, is that determined? Because it sounded like it was the city of St. Pete, but that was kind of what I was curious about. Is TDP gonna be maintaining it, or how is that being considered?
no, absolutely not.
The Estuary program does not have any ownership or authority over that. What we're trying to do is move this through a permitting process so that we can work with the appropriate partner to, whatever alternative we kind of select and are able to get through permitting, that then we would hand that over. We would be helping gather the resources to do this kind of work. I would envision potential partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers with the channel deepening project. If there's some rubble material that they're needing to dispose of, perhaps we would look at that. Grant funding opportunities, but we can't take over ownership and maintenance responsibilities for something like that. We could just sort of catalyze the solution that folks sort of build consensus around.
Tying that into the county's artificial reef plan, maybe something that's an option too. It was the city of St. Pete that initially deployed the project, but I don't think there's anything in those permits that, held them to monitoring that or anything like that at that time. So
we have had some preliminary conversations with the city of St. Pete because of the work that they're doing at the North Shore Seagrass Mitigation Bank. They'll be generating some revenue and looking to do environmental projects with that. So that is an option. And then, of course, we've also been talking to them. And then this is more of a curiosity question. So I'm not sure how this was discovered. But do you think this is the extent of how many of these streets might be out, or is there the possibility that there's more? So this was discovered through a hard bottom mapping survey. We have not mapped 100% of the bay using those survey techniques, so I cannot say for certain that this is all of those. We have mapped the majority of the areas in Pinellas County waters where we think hard bottom habitats are likely to exist. So I can't say for certain, but I would suggest it's probably a low probability that more of these exist.
All right, so just to follow up, we put Mentimeter QR code up on the screen, and I put the link into the chat. So instead of doing this live, we're going to do this in survey format since, in the interest of time and other speakers. So if you guys could fill out this at your leisure, that would be really helpful for us. It includes in there a question on what preference you would like as far as restoration is concerned. And a lot of these questions match up with some of the questions that we're putting together for an angler survey that we're going to be putting out to the community on, how they use the artificial reefs in general, things like that. So there are a few kind of general artificial reef questions in there as well. So we would really appreciate your feedback. And we can either, if we have time at the end, we can show the results, or we can send them out in the TAC update And I just want to reiterate, we have funds to go take this through permitting. So your preferences that you share in the survey will help us sort of shape that permitting and design process, so. Please don't squander this opportunity.
And it's not an authoritative survey. It's a preferential survey to see what you guys feel is most appropriate. So the link has been up there for a while. I think everybody in the room has it. It's also gone out in the chat as a link. So please grab that and fill out the survey when able. We, as Carrie said, we will also follow up with the results. But if you don't have the chance to take it today, we will send out the link again as a follow-up to the TAC meeting so you can take it another time. But very important to get this feedback. So please try to fill it out when you do have that link. Okay, moving on.
Speaker Kira Rivera, I'm going to develop a septic to sewer conversion project.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Kira. Thanks so much for having me. And I'm here to present on the City of St. Pete Septic to Sewer Conversion Project at Ricardo Place Northeast. It was an expansion of city sewer service. So I have a brief agenda. We'll cover the project purpose and background. This project was grant supported by a Tampa Bay Estuary program, Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund. Project objectives, phases, and deliverables, and then lessons learned. And then over on the right, that's images of one of the conversions we completed. So the city of St. Petersburg is committed to converting the remaining septic systems that we have throughout our service area. This project, I think we only have about 17 left throughout the city. The city of St. Pete is about 144 square miles. I think you're all pretty familiar with us, but we're a mid-sized utility. We have about 250,000 wastewater connections or utility customers. And this project was addressing 10 of those remaining septic systems located kind of out in the Gandy area, adjacent to Whedon Island and Masters Bayou, and also adjacent to the underserved water body of the 77th Avenue Canal. And this area is highly vulnerable to pollution. So this project was funded by the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund, and that was kind of a critical component to being able to implement this project. Septic systems are failing. Most of the St. Pete housing stock was constructed in the 1950s to 70s, so these systems are well past their useful life. The city had funding to expand the public sewer infrastructure. However, based on our city codes, that would mandate that these private property owners, these homeowners, would have to connect to the city sewer system within 30 days of it being installed and available for connection. And obviously that places a huge burden on homeowners that they probably weren't expecting or planning for. It's a fine balance, and being able to utilize alternative funding really remove that barrier for both the city and the homeowners. However, convincing homeowners to participate in these types of projects and take advantage of the funding is sometimes a challenge. We had actually applied for other funding sources through FDEP, like the point source pollution and water quality improvement grants, and had not gotten a lot of buy-in or support from them utilizing money on the private side. There just wasn't a lot of interest in our proposals, at least. So this was a wonderful opportunity, and we kind of hope to consider it like a pilot project. So here's the project location. There were 11 lots, but 10 existing structures that we were addressing with the project. And as I mentioned, we were able to utilize environmental restoration funds I think everybody in the room is pretty familiar with this funding opportunity. But I've been sharing this story with the Wastewater Forum and other partners and letting them know that it's available. So awards typically range between $25,000 and $250,000. There's a one-to-one match. All kinds of different entities are eligible to apply. The solicitation, solicitation that year needs to be updated, but you should look into it now. And projects need to be within the estuary program's boundaries. They should address the RFP funding priorities for that year and reference the CCMP. So our objectives were to convert 10 residential properties to the sanitary sewer collection system. We had estimated initially that we would reduce nitrogen by 126 pounds annually. We had pre-water quality monitoring data that was active through 2023. So we committed to creating a new sampling site for that location to monitor the impacts post-conversion, and then connecting public outreach and gaining homeowner participation in the replacement process. We had 4 phases to the project: planning and outreach, permitting and design, the actual conversions, and then the post-conversion review and reporting. And then many deliverables, all the outreach materials, the plans and permits, homeowner agreements and invoices, and then post-conversion review and permitting. So these are some of the deliverables. We worked with our legal team to develop a homeowner agreement. This agreement established the relationship between the homeowner and the plumber, and ownership of the infrastructure as private property, that the homeowners would be responsible for maintenance and future replacement. And it also gave the homeowners, allowed the homeowners to authorize the city to pay the plumbers directly on their behalf. And so, they weren't responsible for any financial burden or coming up with any money up front. And then on the right was a certified letter that we distributed to all of the homeowners impacted by the project, signed by the mayor, tried to make it very serious. Some examples of the permits, and then process photos from the conversions that we required the plumbers to provide, and then outreach that we distributed in the neighborhood and at neighborhood association meetings prior to kicking off the project. Following the conversion process, we distributed a homeowner survey and a plumber survey just to gauge participation. Some of the questions I thought would be of most interest to this group were, in your opinion, what were the most important benefits of this project? Before the project, how well did you understand why the conversions were being done? And then after the project, how well do you understand the benefits? We had like 90% satisfaction. I think there was one person who just would have preferred to maintain their septic system, but overall, everyone ended up participating. We had some really interesting lessons that we took out of completing this project. Early clear communication is critical. It's great for the homeowners to feel like they have a choice, even if they don't. In this case, the choice was to take the money or spend your own. Could be as pleasant or difficult as you'd like. But clear scoping for both the homeowners and the plumbers. I had an internal kickoff meeting with all the impacted departments. You wouldn't think it would be that hard, but it was, finance and procurement and codes and billing and building. And so more complex than it probably should have been, and our water quality team. So that was really helpful. And then also including them in the public outreach meeting gave the homeowners a chance to ask questions about W-9s and the permits and plumber qualifications directly of the building staff and permitting staff. So that was very helpful. If your procurement process with registering vendors is complex, it's great to try to get that started early on, so you don't have delays. And as simple as your communication can be and your forms can be, that'll just help you out in the end. There's a lot of handholding that goes on with these public partnership projects, as you can guess. I think we only had one issue or point of discussion between the plumbers and the homeowners regarding restoration, but that was easily resolved. So really the before photos are very helpful. And for us, you know, we had the plumbers restore the sites to as good condition as possible, but there was no like, expensive restoration. That was all at the homeowner's expense. We really wanted the money to go towards the pipes and the projects. So that was it for me. Happy to answer any questions you have. Yeah.
Service. How well was that conveyed? How well was that accepted by the residents? Do they care?
80% of them said that they thought that was the most important benefit of completing this project, even over improving reliability of their systems or the financial assistance that they were receiving. So yeah. I will say that we started this project shortly after the hurricanes. And so there had been lots of flooding and, spills are in the news, and everybody felt like, this was an opportunity to do their part and improve their private property. That might have helped with our acceptance.
I just want to share with the group. Or sewer conversion or for private lateral sewer line replacement. As participants support costs. The language that's important, but if your government has that need, that is something that we can support either through the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund or through our work plan funding. And we're also supporting a lot of these efforts through our Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So I know we're working with both Pinellas County and Hillsborough County to do septic to sewer conversions in their jurisdictions as well. So I'm wondering, Kira, if you have any lessons learned about the importance of requiring hookup, like so ordinances, structure, or how to communicate with people, because I am hearing from, I think, Pinellas County in particular, many folks are declining to hook up to the system. So I'm wondering if you have any tips, tricks, what your ordinance looks like.
Yeah, our city ordinances are different than the counties, both for laterals and for septic systems. And I think that has contributed to the success, and levels of participation in both of our programs. And I hope I didn't neglect to mention, but one of the reasons why this funding was so critical is because the city of St. Pete's ratepayer dollars and bond covenants prevent us from spending any utility dollars on private side work. And then a lot of the grant funding opportunities have those restrictions as well. So this is really just, work that we've been wanting to do and have not been able to implement. We do require, if sewer is available, you have 30 days to connect that in the city's ordinance regarding septic systems. And then for laterals, they have a longer time to address or cure a defect. But it is established in our city code that the lateral is owned by the homeowner. It is their responsibility to maintain and replace. And if it is identified as defective by the city or a plumber, the homeowner has, I believe it's 180 days to address that defect. So our lateral program has been a wonderful resource to be able to, it was really hard to enforce, again, kind of same situation that we had with the septic systems. It's really hard to go out and cite somebody for something that you know is going to be a $10,000 repair. So having these funding sources has been critical for us, and I'm so grateful for Estuary Programs partnership. Awesome. Happy to share any outreach materials or copies of our agreements with anyone if there's interest.
Thank you very much, Kira. Okay, before we jump into our group activity, I will quickly put in a plug for our 2026 benthic special study sites. We do this every year. I really encourage and appreciate feedback from you all on where we can go to do this. But to give you just a quick background about it, the Estuary program has been working with and supporting EPC of Hillsborough County for a number of years for their benthic monitoring program. This is a really valuable data set that looks at sediment health, both in the organisms that are in the sediment, but as well as the contaminants. So each year there's 44 sites that are randomly chosen to survey the bay bottom, but it's up to us in the TAC at our discretion to choose 20 additional sites as what we call special study sites, where we want to go and maybe take a closer look or get baseline information on particular locations. So that's the ask today. As always, we being the Estuary program can come up with these sites on our own, but it's better when we work through this as a group and get your thoughts on where we could go as well. And just to give you, if you go on our dashboard here, you can look at all of the past special study sites, but just a quick survey of the last 6 years where we have gone. Last year, we were looking at the Little Manatee River, looking at the wild and scenic component there and seeing if we can get some baseline information there, as well as some concerns about the Braden rivers that have been undersampled as well. And then you can look at the past years as well to see where we've gone. So we just had kind of a brief internal discussion, mostly just throwing spaghetti at the wall to see where some potential ideas might be for this year. We also spoke with EPC, but these were a couple of thoughts we had, nothing set in stone. These are just up for consideration of where we could go, barring any sort of feedback from you all. But and we're not going to hit all these basically. So we typically pick 2 locations, divide those 20 sites, 10 per location. So we'll probably end up picking 2 of these things, or if you guys have other ideas where we could go, we definitely welcome them. But just in brief, I kind of described the location there, but also the rationale. Big Little Bayou on the peninsula there. I know FWC is proposing a warm water refugia for manatees, and we're thinking about getting some information about sediment health there. Not to bring up the port proposal again, but when that did happen a couple months ago, we did sort of realize we had a lack of information about that footprint area. So it might be good to look at that again. Also, the Inner Bay Peninsula, there's a beneficial reuse proposal there for some of the dredge material that's coming out of the port expansion, looking at sampling some of the sites down there to look at the sediment health. Channels 5, A, and G in Old Tampa Bay. These have been sampled in the past, but there's been some restoration projects looking at removal of saltwater barriers, and it might be good to revisit those to see how that's changed the sediment health. And then finally, Hillsborough Alafia Rivers, there's issues there with surface water withdrawals or questions around that that we might look at as well. So, like I said, we will pick locations without feedback from you all, but I will leave it there if anybody has burning desire, a particular location where they want to sample. I'm all ears. Natasha, use the mic, please.
So local, there's no permit, there's no application, so we couldn't speak to any of that because it does not exist other than conceptually.
Did you say that Braden River was one of the
It's already a permanent site.
It's all, we sampled it last year. The information should be coming December. Okay. Anybody online have any? I can't see the online comments, but
There's one.
noted. Thank you for that. Okay, I'll send out another request and TAC follow-up email, just reminding folks if you have thoughts on where we could go, let us know. You know, we throw up options here. Doesn't mean set in stone, but this is driven by the TAC every year. Try to drive it with the TAC. So any feedback you can provide is appreciated. Okay, now for the main event. For those in the room, you may notice that we've set up the tables differently. We are going to have a discussion. This also involves people online. So if you are online, stay online. I will see if you leave. But there are ways for folks online to stay involved. We'll go through that in a bit. But just to give quick background, we'll go through details of how this process will work after Blake gives his presentation. But the TBEP every 10 years updates their CCMP, our Comprehensive Conservation Management Plan, which is our authoritative document that describes all of the things, actions, activities that we care about as a program. It is a community-driven stakeholder document that you all are meant to use and help support your work as well. So we're kicking off that revision process by testing the waters with you all on some of the thoughts, ideas, concerns around how we might approach revising this document. And Blake has done a great job doing some preliminary survey work to get different perceptions on the existing document that will help us. And that will guide the conversation today. So, Blake.
Yeah, so kind of as Marcus said, hopefully most of you have heard about the Baywide Satisfaction Survey. So we launched it back in February, and it ran through February and March. And it's our primary instrument that we're using to collect initial feedback from the community as well as folks within our own networks to get a better idea of where we're headed in the future for this next CCMP. So the survey, we had almost 1,000 people respond to it, take it. It constitutes mostly a random representative sample of the public who completed it either online or mail out surveys to folks living in underserved and overburdened communities. But we also had a small subsample that we call our in-network. And so these are folks that are somehow either directly or indirectly associated with Tampa Bay Estuary program. They may be directly engaged with us, like you guys, folks that get our newsletters, but also any of our partners that shared the survey. And then the residents took it, then we would consider them still part of that in-network because we know that they probably have a more environmental sort of orientation to them, and we don't want to just lump them in with a random person on the street. So in addition to that, we also had some questions in there that we wanted to be able to compare the public's perceptions with those of water quality and restoration practitioners. So we also had a decent amount of nerds, maybe some of you that are here present or online, that also took the parts of the survey and provided your expertise. So thank you very much. So going through this, I'll show you some of the comparisons between the public's responses and these in-network folks. But just to get an idea of the bounds for the responses that we see here, here's the general representation for both of those two audiences. Mostly, maybe unsurprisingly, Hillsborough and Pinellas County have the most representation amongst the public sample, but otherwise there's a relatively equal spread between Pasco, Polk, and Manatee counties, and just a sliver of Sarasota where we've got like a little corner of them at the very bottom of our estuarine boundary. And then our in-network also a little bit more skewed, this one to Pinellas County, but much more representative of just those two counties as a whole. So as a reminder, what did the Baywide Satisfaction Survey include? Well, the primary goal of it was to help us inform our next CCMP. So that was the bulk of the material. We couldn't include all 38 or so actions currently in our CCMP. I mean, we could, but people wouldn't do it. So we, as a staff, prioritized 10 CCMP actions that we currently have because we really wanted input on them. We wanted to hear how much progress folks think we've made on them, as well as some ones that we were considering maybe what's the future for those particular actions. And so for each of those actions, we asked folks to indicate how relevant they thought it was, the level of progress, the feasibility of it for the next 10 years, and the importance of that action for the next 10 years. But we also included several other things. We included questions to help gauge people's perceptions of the estuary program as a whole, our image, our sense of credibility or reliability, trustworthiness, those types of things, their experiences of the activities that we offer to them, the usefulness of various resources we provide, as well as just our overall performance as an estuary program. We also included a section where we wanted to gauge the public's perceptions of different types of habitats. So we included some experimental components where we had people look at different types of shoreline designs, from seawalls all the way to oyster reefs, as well as different types of native habitats on land to better understand the types of habitats that are most desirable to residents and the specific characteristics or qualities of those habitats that they ascribe that desirability to. And that's one of the ones where we have the results in comparison to the opinions of the restoration experts that we solicited. Similarly, we also wanted to gauge people's perceptions of water quality based off of surface water and underwater images. And so again, we kind of we showed folks different images and asked them what they believe the quality of the water was based off of the image shown to them, how normal they thought those expected conditions were for the Tampa Bay, as well as other characteristics associated with that quality. Again, this is another one where we are able to compare the public as well as water quality expert opinions. And then the last thing that the survey included was to gauge people's changing experiences with nature. So we offered folks various examples of different types of direct nature engagement activities, like urban nature areas, outdoor sporting areas, wilderness areas, those sorts of things, as well as their indirect experiences with nature. So how often they spend in a room with a view of nature nearby, or listening to nature sounds, recordings, documentaries, and things like that. And we're able then to quantify that change over time because we ask about their past and their present time spent doing these activities. Now, for the sake of time, for the focus of today's presentation, I'm just going to be talking about the CCMP specific survey questions. But if you want to learn more about the other ones, there's different options available, different meetings, as well as a report that's coming up where you can learn more. So getting into those CCMP actions that we included in the survey, I just wanted to give you a brief sort of highlight of what all of this means so that whenever you see these coming up in the survey, you have an idea of which ones we're talking about. So this first one we have is really about fertilizer ordinances, so reducing nitrogen runoff from urban landscapes, mostly through those local fertilizer ordinances. This reclaimed water action about expanding the beneficial use of reclaimed water. Another one, identifying and understanding emerging contaminants of concern. This health indicators one, assessments of human and environmental health indicators suitable for our recreational waters. This living shorelines one, it's really encouraging habitat enhancement along altered waterfront properties, enhancing the ecosystem values of tidal tributaries, minimizing impacts to wildlife and habitats from dredging impacts, promoting public involvement in bay restoration and protection, providing for and managing recreational uses of the bay, and then last one is our climate adaptation CCMP action. And so as I go through, kind of keep in mind what those activities are as you see them pop up. But basically the way that this worked is that we gave folks a description of the entire action, all of the things that are included in it. And then for some of the folks, because we did ask if they were worked for any of our partner organizations, we were able to identify if somebody was basically employed by one of our partners that has been assigned to this action. So it was an opportunity for us, for those folks, to ask them if they thought that significant progress had been made in their organization over the last 10 years on this particular action. But then for everybody else, we gave them these ratings. So on a scale from very low to very high, we wanted to know how relevant they thought that particular action was for their city. So this local relevance, the relevance to the Tampa Bay region as a whole, so a broader regional relevance, as well as the relevance to the groups that they belong to or people they identify with. So this is a measure of social relevance. Gauging the progress made over the last 10 years. If they were an employee of one of our partners, we asked them about the perceived feasibility of this action over the next 10 years. And then finally, the overall level of importance that they would ascribe to this for the next 10 years for our CCMP. So the sort of key results that we have here, there's a lot that we can pull out, but here's some of the highlights. Basically, in terms of the characteristics themselves, we did find that for the public, pretty much all of the actions were considered important to them. So that's a pretty good result for us. We did see that of the things that are high priority for the public, emerging contaminants and health indicators did inch out into the sort of most important CCMP actions for the public, but not necessarily for our in-network audience. We did see that the regional relevance was the most influential factor in what predicted people's level of importance. And while local relevance wasn't as important to those predictions, we do see some variation spatially in terms of differences of opinions of local relevance. Now, in terms of progress that's been made, we did, the public and the in-network audience did identify some areas with the greatest perceived achievements, most notably recreational access, public involvement, living shorelines, and fertilizer ordinances. The lowest achievements being in those emerging contaminants, dredging impacts, health indicators, and tidal tributaries. Also, we did ask a question about how people use the CCMP, and we see that the majority of folks are primarily using it as a knowledge base to learn more about what's going on in the Bay and what they can do. Now, I'll just go into some of the examples. So here's a full sort of in-depth look at each action, kind of information that we have from it. So this is an example using the fertilizer ordinances action. For each of it, you can see a breakdown in the percent of both the public respondents and the in-network respondents, how much they rated each of these different perceptions of local relevance, regional relevance, social relevance, progress that's been made, feasibility, and importance, and their different ratings. So if I went through all 10 of them, it'd be a lot. So we're not going to do that. We're just going to do some highlights of them. So getting back to those key findings that we have here, here's all of our actions on the side. And this is the level of importance that's been ascribed to them from the public. So again, getting back to this key point here, basically all of them are considered important by the public. And so that's a great thing. That means by and large, most of these actions, we won't have to try to convince anybody that they're important. It is not super helpful in terms of prioritizing things based off of the public. But if we do look really closely, we do see the emerging contaminants and the health indicators do inch out just to the front of the lines for that. But now I'm going to show the in-network. So the folks here potentially in this meeting, you guys had a lot of different opinions on this. So it gives a little bit more to work with here. So I'm just going to highlight here what sort of inches out on top in terms of the in-network audiences. Most important things are the fertilizer ordinances and the living shorelines. There's a lot of variation in here, but really sort of one of the key things to notice here is that the emerging contaminants and health indicators, which are the most important to the public, have some of the lowest ascribed importance to the in-network audience. So that is another thing that we're going to have to consider in addition to what are our priority CCMP actions? How do we reconcile what may be important to us as tech members, as people involved in our management program, versus what the public is really interested in and what's most important to them? Now, we did look at creating a model to see what is the most important characteristic that drives people's levels of priorities. I won't go into all of this, but basically this shows the results of the model to see which characteristics best predict people's level of importance. And as I said in the beginning, the one thing that really stands out here is the regional relevance of an action. So basically, that's a good outcome for us that says, hey, for something to be important to someone, it doesn't always have to be a local issue. They don't have to necessarily say, hey, this is a problem in my backyard, therefore it's a problem. People recognize that this is a regional plan and that just because something isn't relevant to where they are doesn't mean they're not supportive of having it in there. So that's really great for us. That could have gone really bad in there. But overall, we can see that local relevance is still predictive of importance, as well as social relevance and progress that's been made. In terms of thinking about local relevance, some things that do stand out are some levels of spatial variation. And so we do have zip code data for all of our respondents. So we can create maps like this that show the average score of local relevance for each of those actions. And there's a lot of deep dives that you can do on it. I've just highlighted 4 actions here that show some of the best variation. And I'll just draw your attention to some particular areas here. So we can see some areas in Pasco County, Northeastern, Hillsborough, Western Polk, as well as down in Northern Manatee, Southern Hillsborough. We have more variation across these. So if we look at that sort of Southern Manatee County, Southern Hillsborough County area, we can see that there's more perceived local relevance for fertilizer ordinances than there are for living shorelines, tidal tributaries, and climate adaptation efforts. In Pasco County, we can see a lower perceived relevance for fertilizer ordinances, tidal tributaries, those sorts of things. So there's a lot that we can do, deep dives into this, but one of the things to consider is about why people have these perceptions of varying local relevance for these actions. Do we think those perceptions are accurate, or do we think maybe they're inaccurate? And then we have to think about how do we make something seem more locally relevant if it is an issue that we think is relevant to those areas. Now, in terms of progress, so this is a graph showing for all of the people who are partners to these actions, how many of them said that they had made significant progress or not over time. And what I'm really just going to pull your attention to are the ones that received the greatest sense of progress over time, and that is the fertilizer ordinances, living shorelines, public involvement, and recreational access. In contrast, the ones where our partners indicated that we have the lowest amount of achievements, that's in the emerging contaminants, health indicators, tidal tributaries, and dredging impacts. And that's another one to kind of think about, those emerging contaminants and health indicators being one of the most important for the public, but yet our partners reporting some of the lowest levels of progress on those things. And then the last thing that I'm going to cover is the use of the CCMP from folks. So we asked them, of the people who said that they had read or used the CCMP for, what were the different reasons that they used them? And there's a bunch of different ones here, but really the ones that stand out from both the people on the streets to the people that are in our own network is that they're primarily using the CCMP to learn about issues that are affecting the Bay, learning about the actions that we are proposing to take, and how they can personally help with these issues in the Tampa Bay area. So we're really sort of seeing it as like a source of just general information, right? But we were a little surprised that more people weren't using it for more practical reasons, like to solve a particular problem in their area or to use it for a restoration project or a research project or a grant project, those sorts of things. So a bit more of like a practical use out of the CCMP. So that's another thing we kind of want to think about is, are we happy with the CCMP just being kind of a book about information, right? It's just a nice sort of niche Google source for people to learn about what's going on here? Or do we want it to be used a bit more as a practical tool that people can use to solve problems? And if we want to do that, what is needed to change in the CCMP? So that's just a high level overview of the CCMP specific stuff. If you want to learn more about the evaluations of different native habitats and shoreline designs, that's going to be the focus of this presentation at the Habitat Restoration Consortium meeting. Spoiler alert, there's some stuff here people are not going to like in there. So that'll be a fun one. Come to that meeting if you want to hear about that. If you do also want to hear more about some of the perceptions of the Tampa Bay Estuary program, some of the water quality results, we did present an overview of those at our management board meeting back in May. The recording is on YouTube, and you can skip through some of the boring stuff and get straight to that. But also, soon we will be having a full report of the Baywide Satisfaction Survey results. And so it'll have literally everything. It'll probably be very long, but it would give you anything and everything that you wanted for the results. Don't ask me when it's coming out, but it'll be soon. Yeah, so before we get started in our activity, want to open it up to any initial questions or thoughts or comments before we do some deeper dives into some of these results in our breakout groups. Seeing none.
No, they want to talk.
All right. Yep.
I just have a statement. I'm really looking forward to seeing how I did on Tampa Bay or not.
What does that mean? The management board?
For what is it?
For the like.
We're not ascribing any technically right or wrong answer to it, but you will be able to see what the majority of people think. And if you remember what your answer was, you'll be able to see how you did relative to it.
It's on YouTube. We don't need to check.
Survey, I've got 26 responses. Thank you, everyone. But there's more people online in the room, so.
There are 40 people.
Okay, 2 people left. I'm gonna figure out who that is. All right. Okay, so I have some instructions about how this activity is going to run. I have some instructions for those in the room as well as those online. So wherever you are, pay attention to your respective components. We have 4 stations set up. Each station has a TBEP facilitator that will help guide the conversation. We will spend 15 minutes at each station. So those in the room, be prepared to move quickly. Those online, we will also have breakout rooms, which I will open them if they're not open already. I can do that. I don't know if somebody else wants to jump on it, but the idea is that each one of these tables will hit on particular graphic or topic that was in Blake's presentation to get your thoughts on it. Do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? Are there things we didn't consider? Just how do you feel about it overall? I think the 4 ones are what are listed as the important actions by the public in a network. The second one is what are the underachieving actions where we haven't made progress? What are the overachieving actions? And then general use of the CCMP. How do you use it? And again, this is information that will be immensely helpful to us as a program moving forward for how we think about improving our CCMP for this next 10 years, basically. And this is a document that you all use and support your own work. So help us help you in shaping it. Let's see. So those in the room, we have, I think, 12 people. So that means we could have 3 people at each table. So we have 5 people back there. So 2 of you discuss amongst yourselves. 1 of you over there move to this table. That way we'll have an even split. Um, and okay, so 1 person from over there then. Rock, paper, scissors. No, all the supplies at the table. Okay. And so then those of you online, you will go to one of 4 breakout rooms. Each one of those breakout rooms corresponds to one of these tables. When we start this activity, I will mute the room. When you're in a breakout room, there's a computer at the table that is assigned to that breakout room that the facilitator will also monitor. But if you have something to say, something, if you can hear the conversation at the table, um, obviously feel free to speak up. But we will try our best to make this inclusive of those online virtually as well. When you do, so those online, you are self-selecting to go to a breakout room. Don't everybody go to group 1 all at once. Pick one at random. That way we will hopefully have an even distribution of those online within the breakout rooms. And then when the 15 minutes go up for each session, those online go to another breakout room. Pick one at random. And the idea is that after an hour, you will have gone to each of those 4 rooms to contribute to the conversation. We have in the room lots of material. Again, it's going to be a handout that will help guide the conversation. For those online, that information is also available for you to look at to help the conversation as well. I will paste that link in the chat. But if you also go to the agenda, it's going to be this link, the CCMP update activity with hopefully some clearly labeled documents that say group 1, 2, 3, or 4 that corresponds to the room that you're in. Okay. I think we're good. Any questions on the process? I will do my best to keep time. Anything else? Yes, Maya? Yes, the room will get loud. Please, civil discourse, inside voices. We want to be able to hear the people online as well, and we want them to hear us. But only at the table that or room they're in. So we'll try our best. Okay, any questions on that before we proceed? Michelle? Okay, well we'll sort that out. If you're having trouble online getting into a breakout room, we can assign you. They should be open and you should be able to access them at will, but we can support you in that effort. Okay, the clock starts now. So if you're online, pick a room. If you're having problems, let us know. In the room, discuss at will. Yes, I'm going to tell you how to rotate. Those in the room, two of you will go clockwise, one of you will go counterclockwise. And we will continue that until you've hit every table. So pick which direction two of you needs to go clockwise, one counterclockwise. Yeah, Ed's working on it. Yep, and Ed is closing the room, and yeah.
Here's a 1 minute
Yeah,
countdown once you close them.
I'll keep that in mind next time.
All right. Everyone should be back in the lobby now. I'm gonna open it all the rooms back up again.
Okay, I don't know if people online can hear me. But if you can, yep, can hear you loud and clear.
Hey Ed, I was already in that group, but I can happily join it again.
No, we're gonna probably have to manually assign you to a different group, so bear with us
Yeah,
just
assign
a
me
second.
to Ed, please. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, same here.
Same here.
Ed, so the facilitators in each room, each breakout session needs to tell the people in the room to move. If we close the rooms, it'll screw up everything.
I wasn't able to. I could see who was in each room, but it didn't give me an option to actually select and enter a different room. That I could tell.
Yes. All right. Looks like Michelle, Maya, Blake are on it. I'll make sure Carrie does it.
All the same people are.
If you could break up.
Eve Klitzberg, what room were you in before?
The CCMP use.
Okay. Aaron Parker, what were you in group 4 as well before?
I was in group 1 before.
Ray, what group were you in before? Ray Pribble?
I was in group 2.
Okay. Heather Bryan, what group were you in before?
She was in 3.
saying like,
Right.
Really wants academia to be
Thank you
more
all.
closely involved. We thinks it's a
Okay, those of you online, you should be out and back into the main room. Again, go back and select a group you have not been in yet and enter that breakout room. If you are having issues, please enter it into the chat. Do not go off mute because it creates chaos.
an online room and then do our best. I've been trying to, this is like a pretty convenient environment. How you currently use the CCNP versus how we can change the CCNP to make it future, but and I guess I'll leave it to the I'm happy to see so far. I think that the real thing is should be the effective versus having I guess CCMD conversation, the pension, the value of both, how you might find that needle. And then we also talked a lot about how we have infrastructure, the new CCMP, and include education tactics, research tactics, tactics, all of it in the different rather than having to scam them. And then the last topic is for implementing it, whether or not that's the public's responsibility or combination of the thing, and probably better communicate that. We actually last responsible and just being for coming up with what our priorities versus like everything else that's important maybe not full responsibility that's my quick theory. If there's anything that's on that's in my summary that really resonates with you, we can put a dot next to it. Just
Okay, those of you online, you should be back in the main room. This is the last rotation. Go to the remaining group you haven't gone to. And if you're having issues, enter it into the chat, please, and we will sort you out. Let us know which room you need to go to in the chat. Okay. That is everybody and everything done, discussed. That was like a well-oiled machine, huh?
I really liked it from the online perspective. That was really efficient. So thank you.
That's good to hear. Not being virtual, it seemed rather chaotic, but seemed like it worked. But we still like you to be here in person. It's much better. Okay, we are doing great on time. We do have some time to just talk about it a little bit. We'll start by having each of the facilitators at the tables give a quick 1 minute summary of some of the highlights, main points you heard in your group. Keep it brief, keep it short. Don't just read the bullet points, but I think we all know that. So let's see, I'm just gonna pick somebody. Michelle. I saw that. And talking to the mic, please. I think we all know. We all went to the groups, yeah.
Progress made or increase in knowledge about that action itself. And the group wondered if it was showing, more where our communication efforts have been focusing on versus actual progress made. And then along that same line, wondering if the public's knowledge of these actions was driving their perception of progress made. With the partners, there were some questions about their scope of work themselves and how that may have influenced their perception of progress. So one example was with dredging. For one person, dredging and impacts of dredging meant something very different than for another person. And so how they would have rated progress made or thought about that was very different. We don't think we should generally retire any of these actions though. We do think that, I'm saying we collective, we may want to reword or reprioritize some of these actions. And some of that also come in, it paired with how we define museum and scope of. And perhaps if we define CCMP and its scope in a certain way, we might adopt some of these actions with partners that they need to lead. One person had a really interesting observation that the public's perception of all of these priorities, but that they were high priority, or sorry, all of these actions, but they were all high priorities, but they generally had a much lower perception of progress made as compared to the in-network audience. And that was a place where it's telling us maybe we should focus more on communications around this effort so that there's more awareness of the action itself and the progress made.
Okay, I'm going to summarize the next group and then all the rest of the summarizers are going to summarize from up here so everybody online can hear everything. This table is the CCMP use table. And I would say there were three main sort of topics that were, generally agreed upon by all of the folks that rotated through. Marcus, can you please move? Thank you. So one is that while the current document is largely tailored towards the management conference, like professionals who use the plan, it's important to keep and maintain this idea that the CCMP is used by all of us, and we ought to change the structure to be more friendly for public use in some way, and more friendly for professional use as well. And so that sort of led into a conversation about making sure we have a strong summary document where things are distilled, simple and plain language and relatively brief form. For making it easier for professionals to use, there was quite a bit of discussion about connecting activities to different types of actions, categories of actions, like educational activities for each of the action topic areas, research priorities connected to a topic area, monitoring priorities for a topic area. And the idea is that that might help sort of make it be clearer where folks' work might intersect with a particular topic. And then the sort of last thing, which was, I think, a lot of the conversation, is really this sort of tension between how wide and the breadth of the topics that the CCMP covers versus the utility of having like really targeted and strategic kind of priorities, and how those two things maybe are at odds. So different groups talked about different strategies for resolving that disconnect. But I will say, I think that generally what I heard from most participants was there's still strong support for retaining a wide ranging sort of series of topics in the CCMP and a flexible set menu of options for all of the partners to contribute. So there was, I think, some specific feedback about how we might thread that needle, but I don't think we're going to move away from that sort of flexible, wide-ranging kind of CCMP. It seemed like that's something that was valuable for folks in the groups. Harry.
Up here. All right. So my group talked about the underachieving actions. Those were emerging contaminants, health indicators, tidal tributaries, and dredging. And one of the things that I noticed as we were going through, there were a lot of commonalities between the groups. Everyone didn't think that the public's perceptions were surprising. And two of the actions were kind of lumped together and the other two were kind of lumped together. So like the emerging contaminants and health indicators, everyone said that, the public is really aware of this because it makes the news, they're hot topics. And, it depends on their personal experience, where they see that. And the other two, tributaries and dredging, they may be less well known, but have local significance. So if folks are living in an area that has dredging going on or live by a tidal creek and see the litter that accumulates in it, they're more aware of that. The other thing that was talked about under emerging contaminants and health indicators is that, it's kind of hard to assess progress because it's more of like a monitoring thing. And in some cases, it's a new area of research. So especially for emerging contaminants, it's hard to tell if there's progress being made. There was a lot of discussion on collaborating with other entities that are involved in either health monitoring or emerging contaminant monitorings, including Department of Health and utilities departments that test like unregulated chemicals. The other thing was making sure to, if it's like a monitoring priority that, sometimes that one's kind of harder to assess progress. So promoting education on that, and then filling data gaps, especially for emerging contaminants. Let's see. In general, everyone thought that all four of these should be retained in the CCMP. However, maybe restructuring it, like you were saying, maybe having some of them under like individual activities, not actions. And also everyone agreed that tidal tributaries is probably the one that we could make the most progress on in the next 10 years by explaining the importance of tidal tributaries to folks in the watershed. There was a lot of talk about, there's difficulty in monitoring. There's so many tributaries. There's a lot of litter going into it, potentially having more of an educational campaign on how, our tidal tributaries are affected by that. And then there was also a lot of conversation about what we can control versus what we can't control. So some of these, they may not be able to actively control, make progress on. So, kind of prioritizing which ones, the particular partners are responsible for. And then the other thing, at least for emerging contaminants and recreational, are health indicators. How can the public health help? Like, kind of educating them on that and funding sources. That's what I got.
All.
Yeah.
All right, and so from the importance table, I'm going to do my best to memorize. But basically, the kind of emerging things that were coming out was pretty much there was a ubiquitous agreement that there was no surprise about the public's preference for public health and emerging contaminants. We talked about how those are the things people discuss. These are the things that are getting on the news. This is of all of the data that exists out there, this is the data that the public is maybe more familiar with and has read about, has heard about, and is exposed to on a more regular basis. So it's something that's just more important to them, more salient to them, things that they have more direct knowledge with. Other folks have kind of consistently brought up that the in-network is tended to be biased towards nitrogen, seagrass, habitat restorations. And so those types of actions are going to be the things that rise to the top for them, but also a lot of issues around thinking about what is the role of the estuary program with these public health indicators, knowing that that's a big Department of Health area, and so they control a lot of that data. There's a lot of roadblocks when it comes to dealing with that data. And so is that even something that's in the wheelhouse for the CCMP, but recognizing that all of this, is interconnected, and there's this path of influence between the things that are, maybe less interesting to the public, like tidal tributaries, but ultimately feed into these other things. So we've had a lot of discussions about, how do we incorporate this into the next thing? A lot of folks mentioned harnessing that intersectionality, looking for ways to combine things. So fertilizer ordinances, we've had a lot of success with those. And so some people think, not much more work needs to be done. It's just continued maintenance and continuing that on. So maybe it gets subsumed within reclaimed water. And it kind of facilitates that action. Other cross, pollinations between them is another thing. And I think that's probably, kind of the major themes that came out from that.
So those are the high-level summaries from each of the groups, from the facilitators, driven by feedback from you all, but as delivered by TBEP. So now I want to say, or actually give you all the opportunity to just, if anybody has any general comments about just any of the topics or the process or what we do moving forward, we have a few minutes to go through that. Just open up the floor if anybody has anything to say. That also applies to those online. We lost about half of the people. Was this a useful exercise for you all? I mean, it was kind of for us to get feedback, but also just to have you all think about what the CCMP means to you.
Yes, I think it was useful.
Useful how?
It's important to, revisit this, and like in the last or couple groups ago, like we talked about why is the CCMP important. So like from SWIM specifically, but the district in general, I mean, it's an important document for us because it allows us to ensure consistency across the board. Like we want to speak not with one voice, but as a consensus-based group, and you guys are awesome at doing that. That's what you do. And so the CCMP is really it's an important document for us because it it allows us to go to our board when we're looking to spend district funds to say that we are consistent with the TBEP, which then by definition means there's consistency across all the various stakeholders. And that's hugely important for us.
Here, I want to ask you, how was this useful for you first, before Maya jumps in?
It's interesting to hear. So I think it's really great to be engaged in the process. It's very valuable. I did think there was a little bit of redundancy, and maybe some of the tables could have been different topics. I think that when you're talking about like some of them kind of crossed into the other realms, and maybe that was good and different, to have redundancy since you were with different groups, different kinds, but some of the outcomes. That was my favorite.
Understandable. A comment from David online. You want to chime in and mention that?
Yeah, I just, from an online perspective, I thought the process worked pretty well. Sometimes it was a little difficult to hear people at the table, but it's more reason to be there in person, like you said. And then I thought it was useful in terms of really thinking about the CCMP, goals, objectives, and activities, and what should be more of a focus, maybe what should be less so. So, yeah, I found it useful.
Okay. Thank you for that, David.
I just want to thank everyone for their thoughts on this, and then remind you that, as Chris alluded to, this is a hugely important document for us in our program. It's going to guide the next 10 years of work, not only what the Estuary program does, but what you all as our partners are doing. And so this feedback today is really just sort of the beginning. It's the kickoff of that process. This is going to help me to identify where I need contractual support, like how that should be structured in the development process. And for those of you both new and old, if you have preferences on how you would like to be engaged in the CCMP update process over the course of the next year and a half, please feel free to shoot me an email, give me a call, and let's talk about that. If you liked the way we did it back in 2017, where we had a number of meetings where we sort of brought a fairly polished version forward and then wordsmithed it collaboratively as a group, we can do that. If you would like to approach it differently this time, I am very interested in approaching the update process differently this time. But if like having it sort of at a meeting, all laid out, spelled out is the easiest way for you, please let me know. If having things in advance or helping co-author is helpful for you, or if you have a different idea, I'm super open to it right now. And it's early enough in the process where we can shape that engagement with you all as the technical advisory committee what that looks like going forward. So early stages, it's helping us shape what that engagement process is going to look like. And hit me up if you have preferences or ideas. Thank you.
Okay. Any remaining lingering comments, questions, concerns from the group? Yeah, and we'll send out a follow-up email with that link as well. One announcement before we adjourn. The next TAC meeting is October 21, and that is at a different location in Tampa at USF at the libraries in the USF Viz Lab, which I'm looking forward to. But just keep that in mind. That will go out email announcements for the next meeting. And yeah, yes. Yeah, just want to thank you all for participating today. Thank you to everyone online that stuck with it. I sounds like that was useful and not too tedious. But yeah, this is, as Maya said, this is the kickoff for the entire process for how we think about the CCMP. And it's probably pretty certain that we'll come back to you all with some more refined questions in the future. But as well as our other committees that you may or may not be involved in, we'll be speaking to you as well. So, Chair, do you want to? Where's your hammer?
So I got you.